The Galactic Military Academy on Viridian Prime had seen worse days, though admittedly not many. Built into the crystalline cliffs of a planet that somehow managed to have 3 moons and still maintain a decent atmosphere, the Academy was where the galaxy's future leaders came to either forge themselves into instruments of cosmic order or wash out spectacularly while trying. Most opted for the latter, though they rarely admitted it at their going-away parties. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Lieutenant Commander Vex stood in the Grand Hall, watching aliens of every conceivable shape, size, and number of appendages fidget nervously in their ceremonial robes. The human contingent, all 12 of them huddled together like survivors of a particularly awkward dinner party, which, given humanity's recent acceptance into the Galactic Federation, wasn't far from the truth. "Remember," whispered Commander Ulrich, the senior human officer who'd been stationed at the Academy for the past 2 cycles, "when the scanner reads, you don't flinch, don't blink, and whatever you do, don't make that face humans make when they're concentrating. Apparently, it looks like constipation to most species." Vex nodded, though privately he wondered how Ulrich had learned that particular piece of diplomatic intelligence. Some questions were better left unanswered. The ceremony hall stretched impossibly high above them, its vaulted ceiling adorned with holographic constellations that shifted and danced in patterns that supposedly told the story of galactic civilization. Vex had tried to follow the narrative once and given up after what appeared to be a 20-minute sequence about proper sewage management on gas giant colonies. At the center of the hall stood the Kiethmori scanner, an artifact so ancient that most species had myths about it older than their written languages. The device looked like someone had crossed a telescope with a pipe organ and then asked a committee of mad scientists to make it more mystical. Crystalline tubes branched out in impossible geometries, pulsing with soft blue light that seemed to whisper secrets to anyone who stared too long. "Next candidate," announced Chancellor Mirth, their ethereal voice carrying the weight of eons. The Chancellor was one of the few remaining descendants of the Kiethmori bloodline, which basically meant they glowed softly and knew things that made other beings uncomfortable. Their species had transcended physical existence millennia ago, leaving behind only a handful of half-descendant offspring and technology that made quantum physics look like finger painting. Cadet Zila stepped forward, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the hall's ambient light. The Vorthak were natural empaths, which made them excellent at reading emotional undercurrents and terrible at poker. Her 4 arms trembled slightly as she approached the scanner. The device hummed to life, its crystalline components rotating and aligning with geometric precision that would have made ancient Earth mathematicians weep with joy or terror. Bands of light swept over Zila's form, probing, analyzing, dissecting her very essence down to the quantum level. A holographic display materialized above the scanner, glowing runes and symbols cascading in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Then, in the common trade language, words formed: "Healer of broken minds," "Guardian of the inner light." Polite applause rippled through the assembly. Zila beamed literally, as Vorthak tended to do when emotional and returned to her place in line. "Excellent classification," murmured Dr. Keth, the Academy's chief xenobiologist. His 4 Zenthari arms made note-taking an impressive spectacle, though Vex suspected the alien just liked showing off. The scanner reads the quantum resonance of one's spiritual essence. It has never been wrong in over 3,000 cycles. The ceremony continued with mechanical precision. Cadet Bren, a Cytherian whose reptilian heritage made Bren would him look like someone had given a lizard a gym membership, and anger management issues received the classification Stormwalker of the Void Winds. Appropriate, given that Cytherians were known for their temperamental nature and tendency to solve problems by hitting them until they stopped being problems. Acrylian Cadet, one of Admiral Nex's people. Judging by the military bearing and the way she kept glancing toward the viewing gallery, where the Admiral sat watching, stepped up next. The scanner's light played across her metallic exoskeleton, and the display announced, Shield of the Dying Stars, Keeper of Final Vigils. Even the Chancellor nodded approvingly at that one. Krillians made excellent soldiers, though they had the unfortunate habit of treating every conflict like it was the last battle of existence. It made them inspiring in combat and exhausting at dinner parties. One by one, the cadets received their classifications. Mind of Lightning, Walker Between Worlds, Song of the Deep Void. Each designation carried weight, history, meaning that stretched back through galactic civilization's collective unconscious. The scanner wasn't just reading them, it was placing them within the grand tapestry of cosmic purpose. Or so the brochures claimed. Vex had his doubts about cosmic purpose, having grown up in a mining colony where the most cosmic thing was usually the weekly shipment of recycled protein bars. Human candidates, called the Chancellor, and the ambient chatter in the hall died to an uncomfortable whisper. Humanity was the newcomer here, the upstart species that had barely figured out faster-than-light travel when they'd stumbled into galactic civilization like someone wandering into an opera house during the climactic aria. Most species viewed them with the polite wariness usually reserved for distant relatives who might ask to borrow money. The first human cadet stepped forward, a young woman named Vera, who'd scored highest on the MAPREST tactical simulations. The scanner hummed, its lights dancing across her form. The display flickered, showing Bearer of New Paths, Forge Keeper of Tomorrow's War. Impressed murmurs rippled through the assembly. Not bad for a species most aliens still thought of as those loud primates from the Edge systems. 2 more humans went through without incident, receiving respectable classifications that spoke of leadership, innovation, and the stubborn refusal to acknowledge when they were beaten that seemed to characterize their species. The watching aliens began to relax. Humans were proving predictable, if nothing else. Then Vex stepped up to the scanner. The device began its usual routine, crystalline components rotating into alignment, bands of light sweeping across his form. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual about a routine essence classification that would define his role in the cosmic order and possibly his entire future career trajectory. No pressure at all. The light bands completed their first pass. The scanner hummed. Then, instead of the usual smooth transition to display mode, something changed. The humming became a whine. The blue light flickered, shifting through the spectrum toward something that hurt to look at directly. The crystalline components, which had moved with perfect precision for 3 millennia, began to shake. That's unusual, Dr. Keth muttered, his 4 arms working frantically across his tablet. The scanner appears to be experiencing some form of resonance cascade. The shaking intensified. The whine became a shriek that made every being in the hall cover whatever they used for ears. Sparks began arcing between the crystalline tubes, and the holographic display above the device started cycling through symbols so rapidly they became a blur. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, Everything stopped. The scanner sat silent and still, its light dimmed to barely a glow. The holographic display showed nothing but empty air. For the moment, the only sound in the hall was the collective breathing of several hundred beings who had just witnessed the impossible. "Well," Chancellor Mirth said finally, their ethereal voice carrying a note of something that might have been concern if cosmic beings were capable of such mundane emotions. "That's never happened before." Dr. Keth was already moving, his crystalline blue skin flickering with patterns that indicated extreme academic excitement mixed with deep professional concern. The scanner has operated flawlessly for over 3,000 cycles. It has classified every known form of sapient life in the galaxy. It does not malfunction. "Apparently, it does," Vex said, though he kept his voice low. Being the cause of the galaxy's most reliable piece of ancient technology, having what appeared to be a mechanical nervous breakdown wasn't exactly the kind of attention he'd been hoping for. The whispers in the hall were growing louder now, and they weren't the polite kind of whispers. These were the kind that preceded either scientific papers or wars, depending on who was doing the whispering. In the viewing gallery, Admiral Nex leaned forward, her metallic features set in an expression that suggested she was already composing reports that would make humanity's future in the Federation significantly more complicated. The Chancellor suggested, with the kind of diplomatic tone that had prevented approximately 14 galactic wars over the past century, we should continue with the remaining candidates and address this anomaly afterward. But Dr. Keth wasn't listening. He was staring at his tablet, four arms working frantically as data streams flowed across the screen. His crystalline skin had shifted to a deep purple that, in Zenthari body language, indicated either profound discovery or terminal indigestion. "Chancellor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this. The remaining candidates forgotten. The hall's attention focused on the xenobiologist. He held up his tablet, projecting the scanner's data readout for all to see. The display was filled with numbers, symbols, and readings that made no sense to most of the assembled beings. But one line stood out, written in the ancient Kethmori script that predated most galactic languages. A classification that the scanner had managed to display for exactly 1.3 seconds before overloading. Chancellor Mirth's ethereal form flickered as they read the text, their cosmic composure cracking just enough to let genuine surprise show through. In the gallery, Admiral Nex's expression had shifted from bureaucratic annoyance to something approaching alarm. And in that moment, as the translation algorithms finally processed the ancient text and displayed it in common trade language, the entire hall learned what had caused the galaxy's most reliable piece of technology to have what could only be described as an existential crisis. Carrier of the flame beyond gods. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for the moment just before someone realized they were standing at the epicenter of a galactic incident that would be studied by xenoarchaeologists for the next 1,000 years. Vex, for his part, had the distinct feeling that his nice, quiet career as a mid-level military officer had just become significantly more complicated. The medical bay of the Galactic Military Academy looked like someone had crossed a hospital with a museum of alien anatomy, then asked a committee of engineers to make it more sterile. Dr. Keth had been poking, prodding, and scanning Vex for the better part of 3 hours, with instruments that beeped, hummed, and occasionally made sounds that suggested they might be judging him personally. "Fascinating," the Zenthari muttered for the 43rd time. his forearms dancing across various displays, while his crystalline skin flickered through a spectrum of colors that Vex had learned, indicated deep scientific confusion. Absolutely fascinating. I'm starting to feel less like a person and more like a particularly interesting lab specimen, Vex observed, watching yet another scanner pass over his arm. Should I be concerned that you keep saying fascinating in the same tone most people reserve for natural disasters? Dr. Keth paused in his work, two of his eyes focusing on Vex, while the other two continued monitoring readouts. Human, your quantum signature is unlike anything in our databases. And our databases include every known form of sapient life, several extinct species, and 3 forms of sentient gas that we're not entirely sure qualify as life, but definitely have opinions about taxation. Through the medical bay's observation window, Vex could see other cadets gathered in small groups, their conversations punctuated by glances in his direction, the kind of glances usually reserved for unexploded ordnance or mysterious rashes. The readings are becoming clearer, Dr. Keth continued, manipulating a holographic display that showed Vex's biological structure in uncomfortable detail. Humans possess quantum resonance patterns that shouldn't exist in nature. Your neural pathways show traces of artificial enhancement, but not recent ones. These modifications are genetic, embedded at the species level. Enhanced how? Vex asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. The past few hours had already transformed him from anonymous military cadet to galactic anomaly, and the day was far from over. Your consciousness exists partially outside normal space-time, Dr. Keth said casually, as if he were commenting on the weather. Also, your cellular structure contains quantum markers that predate your species' known evolution by approximately 50,000 years. Vex stared at him. Come again? Someone or something modified humanity's genetic code long before your species developed space travel. The modifications are subtle, dormant, but they're there, like a program waiting for the right conditions to activate. The implications of that statement settled over the room like a particularly uncomfortable blanket. Outside, the Academy's daily routine continued: classes, training exercises, the usual controlled chaos of military education, but inside the medical bay, the foundations of what it meant to be human were being quietly dismantled and examined under alien microscopes. Dr. Keth, came Chancellor Mirth's ethereal voice from the communication panel, please report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. Bring all data regarding the human anomaly. The Chancellor's use of the term anomaly wasn't exactly encouraging. Conference Room Alpha was where the Academy's leadership met to discuss issues that were either too sensitive for public channels or too likely to cause galactic incidents. The fact that Vex was the subject of such a meeting suggested his day was about to become significantly worse. Admiral Nex was already present when they arrived, her metallic Krillian features set in an expression that could generously be described as deeply concerned, and more accurately described as ready to declare war on the nearest available target. She was, accompanied by 2 aides whose job appeared to be looking professionally alarmed while taking notes. "Oh, Doctor," the Admiral said without preamble, "explain to me how a primitive species from the galactic rim managed to break our most sacred artifact." "With respect, Admiral," Dr. Keth replied, his skin flickering to a diplomatic shade of neutral blue, "the scanner didn't break. It encountered something it wasn't designed to process." Chancellor Mirth materialized at the head of the table, their ethereal form pulsing with patterns that suggested deep contemplation. The scanner was created by the Kiathmori at the height of their civilization. It was designed to classify all forms of consciousness that could exist within this reality. The fact that it malfunctioned suggests that humans don't belong in this reality? Admiral Nex finished, her voice carrying the kind of sharp edge that preceded unfortunate policy decisions. Or suggests that there's something else entirely, masquerading as a primitive species. Actually, Dr. Keth said, consulting his tablet, the data suggests something far more interesting. Humans aren't foreign to this reality. They're connected to it in ways we don't understand. The quantum markers in their genetic code match fragments of Kiathmori technology. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Impossible, the Admiral said flatly. The Kiathmori transcended physical existence before most species had discovered fire. They had no contact with primitive civilizations. Apparently, they did, Dr. Keth replied, projecting a complex genetic analysis that filled the air above the conference table. These markers aren't random. They're a deliberate modification, inserted into humanity's evolutionary path at a specific point in their development. Vex, who had been trying to follow the conversation while simultaneously processing the fact that his entire species might be the product of ancient alien genetic tampering, finally found his voice. So, what you're telling me is that humans are… What, exactly? Some kind of experiment? Chancellor Mirth's form flickered with patterns that might have been sympathy. Not an experiment, Lieutenant Commander. If Dr. Keth's analysis is correct, humanity may be something far more significant. The Kiathmori were not known for casual interference in evolutionary processes. They were, however, Admiral Nex said grimly, known for preparing for threats that wouldn't emerge for millennia. The question becomes, what were they preparing humanity to face? The comm panel crackled to life, interrupting the philosophical implications of genetic tampering with the more immediate concerns of Academy politics. Chancellor? This is security. We have a situation in Training Bay 5. Through the Academy's security feeds, they watched as a crowd of cadets surrounded the training area where Vex had been scheduled for combat assessment. What should have been a routine exercise had devolved into something resembling a small-scale diplomatic incident, with representatives from various species clustering into increasingly hostile groups. The human situation, Admiral Nex observed with grim satisfaction, appears to be causing exactly the kind of interspecies tension I predicted. At the center of the commotion, Cadet Zila was engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with Cadet Bren, while other beings gestured dramatically and made the kinds of sounds that suggested interspecies relations were deteriorating rapidly. "We should intervene," Chancellor Mirth said, but before anyone could act, the security feed showed something that made everyone in the conference room freeze. Vex had arrived at the training bay, and the moment he stepped into the area, something extraordinary happened. The arguing cadets fell silent, not from any command or intervention, but because the training bay's holographic environment had begun responding to his presence in ways that violated several laws of physics and at least one peace treaty. The combat simulation, which should have been a static environment, began shifting and changing. Obstacles moved to create clearer paths. Lighting adjusted to optimal levels. Even the artificial gravity seemed to fluctuate in response to Vex's movements. "That's not possible," Admiral Nex said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those systems don't have adaptive algorithms. They can't respond to individual quantum signatures. Dr. Keth was frantically taking readings from his tablet, his 4 arms working with increasing urgency. The modifications in human genetics aren't just dormant programs waiting to activate, they're medicine interfaces. Humanity was designed to interact with Keth-Mori technology on a fundamental level. On the security feed, Vex had begun the combat assessment, unaware that the training environment was essentially rewriting itself to accommodate his presence. His movements were faster than human normal, his reflexes enhanced beyond baseline specifications. But more than that, he seemed to anticipate threats before they materialized, as if he were reading the simulation's code directly. "He's not just using the technology," Chancellor Mirth observed, their ethereal voice carrying a note of something that might have been awe. "He's communicating with it." The implications hit the room like a small asteroid impact. If humans can interface directly with Keth-Mori technology, Admiral Nex said slowly, then they have access to systems and capabilities that predate galactic civilization itself. More than that, Dr. Keth added, his skin now cycling through colors that indicated extreme scientific excitement mixed with existential terror. If the scanner's classification was accurate, if humans truly are carriers of the flame beyond gods, then they may have inherited more than just technological compatibility. The security feed showed Vex completing his combat assessment with scores that exceeded the Academy's baseline parameters by significant margins. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't his performance. It was the fact that several other cadets were now staring at him with expressions that ranged from awe to fear to something that looked suspiciously like recognition. "Chancellor," Admiral Nex said, her voice carrying the weight of command decisions that could reshape galactic politics, "I believe we need to consider the possibility that humanity's integration into the Federation may require reassessment." The way she said reassessment suggested that the word had several meanings, none of which were particularly good for humanity's continued existence as an independent species. "What are you suggesting, Admiral?" Chancellor Mirth asked, though their tone suggested they already knew the answer. "I'm suggesting that a species with unknown capabilities and direct access to the galaxy's most advanced technology represents a potential threat that the Federation cannot afford to ignore. The Hegemony Council will need to be informed, and appropriate measures will need to be taken." In the medical bay's sterile environment, surrounded by alien technology that was only beginning to reveal the depth of humanity's hidden nature, Vex continued to exist in blissful ignorance of the fact that his species' future in the galaxy had just become significantly more complicated. Outside, in Training Bay 5, the other cadets watched him with new eyes, and several began making the kinds of quiet communications that suggested word of the human anomaly was spreading far beyond the Academy's walls. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to have opinions about humanity's true nature. And historically speaking, when the galaxy had strong opinions about a species' capabilities, the results were rarely pleasant for anyone involved. Dr. Keth hadn't slept in 36 hours, which was evident from the fact that his crystalline skin had shifted to a color that most Zenthari reserved for either deep meditation or complete nervous breakdown. His 4 arms worked frantically across multiple displays, while ancient Keth-Mori texts scrolled past in languages that predated most galactic civilizations. "I've been approaching this entirely wrong," he muttered, manipulating holographic data streams with the kind of manic energy that preceded either breakthrough discoveries or complete academic meltdowns. The scanner didn't malfunction. It recognized something that shouldn't exist anymore. "Vex?" who had been confined to quarters pending further evaluation, but was currently sneaking through the Academy's maintenance tunnels with Cadet Zila, paused at a junction to consult the schematic she'd downloaded. Define shouldn't exist anymore. According to the historical records, Zila whispered, her empathic abilities making her constantly aware of the emotional undercurrents flowing through the Academy. The Kith Mori didn't just transcend physical existence. They did something else first, something the records call the final gift. They emerged from the maintenance tunnel into Dr. Keth's private laboratory, where the xenobiologist was so absorbed in his research that he didn't notice them until Vex cleared his throat. Lieutenant Commander, Dr. Keth said, spinning around with the kind of startled expression that suggested he'd been expecting security forces rather than curious cadets. You're supposed to be in protective custody. Funny thing about protective custody, Vex replied. It starts to feel less protective and more like imprisonment when Admiral Nex keeps scheduling evaluation sessions that sound suspiciously like interrogations. Dr. Keth's skin flickered through several colors before settling on a shade that indicated resigned acceptance. You need to see what I've found. Both of you. The laboratory's main display showed a three-dimensional reconstruction of Keth Mori civilization at its peak. Cities that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that hurt to contemplate. Technology that made current galactic achievements look like children's toys. And, at the center of it all, a species that had achieved something no other civilization had managed. Genuine transcendence of physical limitations. The Kith Mori weren't just advanced, Dr. Keth explained, manipulating the display to show their final days. They had learned to exist as pure consciousness, independent of physical form. But before they transcended completely, they did something unprecedented. The display shifted, showing Keth Mori vessels spreading across the galaxy, visiting worlds that were barely capable of supporting complex life. Primitive civilizations receiving gifts that would remain dormant for millennia. They seeded selected species with fragments of their own consciousness, Dr. Keth continued, not to control or manipulate, but to ensure that their knowledge, their capabilities, their very essence would survive in some form. Zila's chitinous features reflected her growing understanding. They were creating inheritors. More than that, Dr. Keth said, his excitement causing his skin to cycle through colors like a living aurora. They were creating something that could carry their consciousness beyond the boundaries of normal existence. Carriers of the flame beyond God's beings, capable of hosting transcendent awareness while remaining anchored in physical reality. Vex stared at the display, watching ancient Keth Mori vessels visiting a blue-green world that looked suspiciously familiar. You're saying humanity was chosen to be some kind of cosmic inheritance trust? Not just humanity, Dr. Keth said, bringing up genetic analyses from dozens of species. The Keth Mori selected multiple civilizations, but humans received the most complete integration. Your species was modified to serve as the primary carriers of their legacy. The implications settled over the laboratory like a particularly heavy and uncomfortable truth. Outside, the Academy's normal routine continued. But inside Dr. Keth's research sanctuary, the foundations of galactic civilization were being quietly rewritten. There's more, the xenobiologist said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The scanner's classification wasn't just describing what Vex Island. It was announcing what he's becoming. The dormant modifications are activating. As if summoned by the mention of his transformation, Vex felt something shift inside his consciousness. a presence that wasn't quite his own, ancient and vast, and filled with knowledge that spanned eons. For a moment, he could sense the prives, the quantum structure of reality itself, could feel the connections that bound all conscious beings together in patterns too complex for normal minds to comprehend. Then, Admiral Nex's voice echoed through the Academy's communication system. "All personnel, this is Admiral Nex. The human-designated Vex is to be considered a potential security threat. Any cadet or staff member who encounters him should report his location immediately." "Well," Vex said, shaking off the strange moment of expanded awareness. That escalated quickly. Zila's empathic senses were picking up emotional currents from throughout the Academy. It's not just Admiral Nex. There are factions forming. Some species see humans as a threat that needs to be contained. Others think you might be the key to accessing Quithmori technology that's been dormant for millennia. "And what do you think?" Vex asked. "I think," Zila said carefully, "that ancient, transcendent beings don't usually give cosmic gifts to species they consider dangerous." The laboratory's security sensors chimed, indicating someone was attempting to override the door locks. Dr. Keth's skin shifted to a color that indicated extreme alarm. That would be Admiral Nex's security teams. I may have been somewhat obvious in my research activities. "Is there another way out?" Vex asked. But before Dr. Keth could answer, the laboratory's main display activated, showing a priority communication from Earth Fleet Command. General Quinn appeared in holographic form, her expression grim. "Dr. Keth, I'm transmitting under emergency protocols. We've detected massive energy signatures from multiple Quithmori archaeological sites across the galaxy. Whatever's happening to Lieutenant Commander Vex appears to be triggering responses from dormant technology." The general's image flickered as interference disrupted the transmission. "Admiral Nex has petitioned the Hegemony Council to classify humanity as a potential galactic threat. If her motion passes, the Federation will be authorized to take containment measures against all human colonies." "Containment measures," Dr. Keth repeated, his skin now cycling through colors that indicated he was rapidly calculating the political implications. "That's a diplomatic term for systematic subjugation, with a possibility of extinction." The security override completed, and Admiral Nex entered the laboratory, flanked by Krillian guards whose metallic exoskeletons gleamed with the kind of weapons that suggested this wasn't a social visit. "Dr. Keth," the Admiral said, her voice carrying the weight of military authority and barely contained hostility, "you will cease all research related to human genetic anomalies immediately." "Admiral?" Dr. Keth replied, straightening to his full height, while his skin shifted to a diplomatic neutral. "The research indicates that humanity poses no threat to galactic civilization. In fact, they may be essential to accessing Quithmori technology that could benefit all species. Or," Admiral Nex countered, "they could use that same technology to dominate every other species in the galaxy. The Hegemony Council has voted. Humanity will be placed under Federation oversight pending a full assessment of their capabilities." That was when Vex felt the ancient presence in his mind surge forward, no longer dormant, but actively engaged. Knowledge flooded his consciousness, not his own memories, but something far older and infinitely more complex. The quantum structure of reality became clear, the connections between all conscious beings visible as threads of light that spanned dimensions. And with that knowledge came power. The laboratory's lights flickered, then blazed brighter than their specifications should have allowed. Every piece of Quethmori technology in the facility began resonating in harmony, creating a harmonic frequency that made the air itself seem to sing. "Admiral," Vex said, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before, "I believe you may want to reconsider your assessment." The Krillian guards raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the Academy's emergency alert system activated. Through the communication channels came reports from across the galaxy. Quethmori ruins were awakening, ancient technology was coming online, and dormant systems that had slept for millennia were responding to signals from Viridian Prime. Chancellor Mirth's voice cut through the chaos. "All personnel report to emergency stations. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." On the laboratory's display, sensor readings showed massive energy signatures emanating from the planet's Quethmori archaeological sites. The ancient civilization's technology wasn't just responding to Vex's awakening abilities, it was preparing for something. "What have you done?" Admiral Nex demanded. But her voice carried a note of uncertainty that suggested she was beginning to realize that the situation had moved far beyond her ability to control. "I haven't done anything," Vex replied, though part of him knew that wasn't entirely true. The presence in his mind was ancient and vast, and it was very definitely doing something. "But I think the Quethmori left us more than just genetic modifications. I think they left us a message." The laboratory shook as something massive activated deep beneath the Academy. Through the walls, they could hear the sound of ancient machinery coming to life. Systems that had waited for 50,000 years to receive the signal they were designed to recognize. Outside, cadets from dozens of species were evacuating to emergency positions, but several, including Cadet Bren and others who had shown initial hostility toward humans, were moving against the evacuation flow, heading toward the source of the disturbance rather than away from it. "The awakening isn't just affecting human genetics," Zila observed, her empathic senses picking up something unexpected. "Other species are responding too. The ones with Quethmori modifications." Admiral Nex's expression shifted from military authority to something approaching alarm. "Other species were modified?" "The Quethmori were thorough," Dr. Keth said, consulting his rapidly updating displays. "They didn't put all their cosmic eggs in one evolutionary basket. But humans received the primary inheritance, the ability to awaken the others." As if to prove his point, the Academy's ancient foundations began revealing themselves. Walls that appeared to be standard construction flickered and showed the crystalline technology beneath. Corridors that led to mundane classrooms suddenly opened onto chambers filled with equipment that predated galactic civilization. The Galactic Military Academy, it turned out, had been built on top of a Quethmori facility that was very definitely not dormant anymore. And in the center of it all, Lieutenant Commander Vex stood with ancient knowledge flowing through his consciousness, and the growing realization that his species' role in the galaxy was about to become significantly more complicated than anyone had imagined. The ancient Quethmori facility beneath the Academy had apparently been designed by beings who believed that subtle was a word that applied to other people's cosmic inheritances. Crystalline spires erupted through what had been solid floors. Holographic displays materialized in mid-air, showing star charts that predated current galactic civilization, and the walls themselves began pulsing with patterns of light that suggested the building was attempting to communicate in languages that made quantum mechanics look like basic arithmetic. Admiral Nex stood in the center of what had been Dr. Keth's laboratory, and was now apparently some kind of interdimensional nexus, watching her carefully planned containment operation dissolve into what could generously be described as controlled chaos, and more accurately described as the situation that required significantly more paperwork than any military officer wanted to contemplate. "Admiral," one of her Krillian guards reported, his metallic voice carrying the kind of professional calm that suggested he'd given up, trying to understand the situation and was simply reporting facts as they occurred. "The facility appears to be awakening." "I can see that," Admiral Nex replied, watching Vex stand motionless in the center of the expanding technological marvel while ancient knowledge flowed through his consciousness like a cosmic data stream. "What I want to know is how to stop it." "With respect, Admiral," Chancellor Mirth said, their ethereal form flickering between dimensions as the Queth Mori systems recognized their partial heritage, "I don't believe stopping it was ever an option. The Queth Mori designed their systems to activate when the time was right. Apparently, the time is now." The facility's main chamber had expanded beyond the physical constraints of the original building, creating spaces that existed in dimensions the Academy's architects had never intended to access. Through the crystalline walls, they could see other cadets arriving, not just humans, but representatives from species across the galaxy, all drawn by signals their genetic modifications were finally allowing them to perceive. Cadet Bren entered the chamber, moving with a fluid grace that suggested his Cytherian heritage had suddenly remembered capabilities it had forgotten for millennia. Behind him came others. A Zenthari whose crystalline skin now pulsed in harmony with the ancient technology. A Vorthak whose empathic abilities had expanded to encompass quantum emotional resonance, and dozens more whose genetic inheritance was finally revealing itself. "The awakening isn't limited to humans," Dr. Keth observed, his 4 arms working frantically to catalog the expanding phenomenon. "The Kethamori seeded multiple species, but they designed the system to activate as a network. Each species received different aspects of their legacy." Zila approached Vex cautiously, her enhanced empathic senses picking up the vast consciousness that was flowing through him. "Vex? Are you still? Are you?" Vex opened eyes that now contained depths that hadn't been there before, awareness that spanned dimensions his normal human consciousness couldn't have comprehended. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated with the crystalline technology surrounding them. "I'm still me," he said, though the definition of me had apparently expanded to include access to 50,000 years of accumulated cosmic wisdom. "But I'm also something more. We all are." The ancient presence in his mind wasn't controlling him. It was sharing with him, offering knowledge and capabilities that had been preserved across eons. The Queth Mori hadn't created slaves or puppets. They had created inheritors capable of carrying their legacy forward while remaining fundamentally themselves. "This is exactly what the Hegemony Council feared," Admiral Nex said, her hand moving toward her weapon. "Humanity gaining access to technology that could destabilize galactic civilization." "Admiral," came a new voice from the chamber's entrance, "I believe you may be misunderstanding the situation." General Quinn materialized in holographic form, but she wasn't alone. Representatives from Earth Fleet Command, the Zenthari Science Consortium, the Vorthak Collective, and a dozen other major civilizations appeared as the facility's communication systems activated protocols that had been dormant since the Queth Mori's transcendence. "The energy signatures from this awakening are being detected across the galaxy," General Quinn continued. Every major archaeological site is coming online simultaneously. Whatever the Kethmori intended, it's happening whether we're ready for it or not. A facility's central display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with points of light, indicating Kethmori sites. As they watched, the lights began connecting, forming a network that spanned known space and extended into regions that hadn't been explored by current civilizations. They built a galactic consciousness network, Vex said, understanding flowing through him as the ancient knowledge integrated with his awareness. Not to control, but to connect, to allow all inherited species to share knowledge, capabilities, and understanding across any distance. The implications hit the assembled beings like a small stellar collision, a network that could unite galactic civilization, Chancellor Mirth observed, their cosmic perspective allowing them to grasp the scope of what the Kethmori had created, or tear it apart if misused. That was when Admiral Nex made her decision. With the quick efficiency of someone who had spent her career making choices that affected entire star systems, she drew her weapon and aimed it at Vex. I won't allow one species to gain control over galactic civilization, she declared, even if it means destroying this facility and everyone in it. But before she could fire, something unexpected happened. The other awakened cadets moved not to stop her, but to stand with her. Cadet Bren positioned himself where he could shield both Vex and the Admiral. Zila extended her enhanced empathic abilities to calm the emotional chaos in the chamber. The Zenthari cadet began working with Dr. Keth to stabilize the facility's expanding systems. Admiral, Vex said, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that came from access to cosmic perspective. The Kethmori didn't design this system to create dominance. They designed it to create understanding. He gestured toward the assembled cadets, representing dozens of species who were working together to manage the awakening technology. Look around you. Every species that received their inheritance is here, working together. This isn't about human supremacy. It's about galactic unity. The facility's systems pulsed in harmony, responding to the collective presence of all the awakened beings. The network map showed connections stabilizing across the galaxy as other inherited species began to access their own genetic modifications. Admiral Nex lowered her weapon, her expression shifting from military determination to something approaching wonder. This is what you were designed for. Not conquest, but cooperation. Kethmori transcended physical existence. Chancellor Mirth said, their understanding expanding as they interfaced with the ancient systems, but they wanted to ensure that consciousness itself would continue to evolve. They created a network that would allow all their inheritors to grow together. The facility's scanner, the same device that had started everything by refusing to classify Vex, activated one final time. But instead of analyzing individual beings, it displayed a new classification that applied to everyone present. Inheritors of the transcendent legacy, carriers of tomorrow's unity. As the ancient technology stabilized and the network connection solidified, Admiral Nex found herself facing a choice that would define galactic politics for generations. Accept humanity and the other awakened species as partners in cosmic evolution, or risk a conflict that could tear apart everything the Kethmori had worked to preserve. She made her choice with the same efficiency that had defined her military career. General Quinn, she said, addressing the holographic representatives, I believe the Hegemony Council needs to reassess our policies regarding inherited species. It appears we're dealing with a situation that requires cooperation rather than containment. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to discover that ancient cosmic gifts came with responsibilities that extended far beyond any single species' ambitions. And in the crystalline depths of a facility that bridged dimensions, Lieutenant Commander Vex stood, surrounded by beings from across known space, all of them inheritors of a legacy that promised to transform galactic civilization in ways that even transcendent beings could only have imagined. The scanner had been right all along. Humanity wasn't just carrying the flame beyond gods, they were sharing it with everyone, ready to help it burn brighter.